Probably I have writer's block as a natural condition. I mean, when I was a journalist working on a daily newspaper, my only job was New York Times, and that was only between 1956 and 1965, a 9-year period. And I'd have about 4 hours to write something. You know, I'd go out and get an assignment in the morning, and 1 o'clock I'd go back to the office, and by 7 o'clock I was supposed to be into the desk, into the editor. And I'd be laboring over it and laboring on it. I'd be 2 or 3 hours sitting there in the city room, sweating it through. There were others, colleagues of mine, who would just sit there as if they're playing a piano in a fraternity house. It was all coming easily, and it was just fun. They're having fun. I never had any fun. I didn't think writing was fun for me. It wasn't then, it isn't now. But I had always a feeling that I can do a better sentence. I can tell it better. If I only had another 20 minutes, another 50 minutes, another 3 hours, another 20 hours, another 20 years, I can do it better. And sometimes you become, with that mentality, you create these blocks. I mean, it isn't blocks so much as you want to rise above the ordinary, the mediocre, the easy to do, the functionary. You want to rise, you want to do something more worthy of the more discerning reader. And it takes time. It takes time, as my father always said, to make a good suit. It takes time to write a good paragraph. To write a good book takes a lot of time. So you might say writer's block, but I thought writer's block, I mean, that's the phrase, but I thought sometimes writers write too much. I mean, sometimes writers should say, this is beneath my level. Yes, I can get it published, and maybe some readers will read it. But sometimes writers write too much. And they write secondaries, they let it go out there. And it goes out there. And Barnes & Noble's shelves are filled with this stuff. They're a famous writer. You can write 2 bad books, and you get a good book and bad book. I'm not saying you always know what a good book is. I mean, you think you've written a good book. And then maybe you're coming to believe, because reviewers have penetrated your sense of self, it's not a good book. I think of the writers who are great fiction writers. Let's just take people in my lifetime. I think William Styron wrote very, 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 very few books that were not on a high level, whether they were long or short, whether they were Sophie's Choice or Confessions of Nat Turner, or a book about his own depression. It's a fine book. Some of the writers that are more prolific, who were contemporaries, I don't have to name them, you could probably imagine who I'm speaking of, wrote too many books. Yes, they have established with this book and this book and this book their reputation. But there are a lot of books that, had they not been done, nor do I believe they had to be done in order to produce the good books, they could have put it aside. It's tragic when you think that sometimes writers who die, their grandchildren or somebody related will come out of the drawer and find this unpublished book manuscript by some writer. It might be Hemingway, or it might be any distinguished name, John Steinbeck, for example. And they get published. And they didn't want them published because they had the maybe good judgment to know this was not on the level of which I am capable. But sometimes editors don't care, and books are published. But this is, you're hearing me talk in ways that probably doesn't embrace others in the way of attitude, but it's just the way I feel. This is a very, very, very difficult question, but because it's how I felt through everything I've done. I first started when I was 24 years old, writing about the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge, which started to go up. It's between Brooklyn and Staten Island in New York City, and they started to build that in 1959 and didn't finish till 1965 or 64. And I started watching that bridge going up over this period when I wasn't working full-time for the Times. So my days off or after hours, I go to Staten Island or Brooklyn and watch the construction workers. And I thought, I really could spend 20 years writing this book, because the book about a bridge is a book about a monument that is not timeless but can live for centuries. Like the Brooklyn Bridge is more than a century old. And we do not know who the the great builders of that bridge are, except we know the designer, the Roebling brothers, but all the hundreds of people that put the stones together, put the wire, put the cables together. There's no record of those people. So I wanted to do that in the Verrazano Bridge because I was there and I got to know the construction crews. But I could have spent a lot more time. And after that book was published, I was very saddened. I said, I blew it because now the book is out, the story is over, the bridge is built. I should have taken maybe 10 years. And then the next book I did, which is about the New York Times, I did take a long time. But sometimes in the books that I mentioned, the New York Times book and all the others that followed, there in the middle of them, I thought, I'm taking too much time. And I'm never going to live long enough. And sometimes you think you're going to die before the book is done. And then you feel that you have to move faster. And then there's another side of you that said, no, don't do that. You're going to regret it. As I regretted not spending more time on the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge. I wish I had. I didn't. I was too young or too impatient. I don't know what it was. But that book, it's a nice little book, but it could have been more. I didn't quite have the imagination or the willpower when I was young to do that. I haven't made the same mistake since then. But at times since then, I have felt the opposite. I mean, spending 10 years per book is a long time. And during that time, you're doing nothing else. If you're, teaching college, if you're lucky enough to get a teaching position, many writers do that. I think it's a wonderful thing. But I don't want to be on the faculty, not that I've had many opportunities, but there have been a couple of offers. But I felt I can't commit to next year because next year I'm going to be on the road researching. I want to do here, I want to go here. I didn't want to be tied down. I wanted to have what I mentioned before, the option of being free and going on the road and discovering things by chance. And I didn't want to have to know that I had to teach 3 classes next year from September, through June or whatever. Look, it is a very satisfying profession to be in something called book writing. It's very satisfying. But it has its downside. And the downside has to do with your relationship to yourself when you're alone. It's a solitary profession. It isn't, maybe it's fun to write a Broadway musical and to be Rodgers and Hammerstein back in the 1940s doing South Pacific. You're working, or to be a film writer, working with a director, or to be in the cast of, of a whole chorus. But when you're a writer, you're a solitary scrivener. And only your own discipline will get it done. And you have to put in your own hours. No one's saying you have to be there at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning. No one says you have to put in 5 hours or 3 hours or 20 hours. No one says that. You have to be on your own good behavior, if that's the word. And it's really very demanding. If you have any sense of dalliance, or you drink a little too much, or you're on some drugs which you think are going to be energy producing when the reverse is true, you're out of it. You're out of it. And there are people who set great examples. Of my age group, I'd say Philip Roth is the one writer that I think of as a fiction writer, who his whole life he's done good work. And he continues to do good work. It's not sloppy books that he produces. They may be not as shorter this time and longer next time in terms of fiction. But he's a great historian. If you read Philip Roth from the 1960s, as I have, to his most recent book published in 2008, you get a sense of this country as well, if not better, than a historian. It's fiction, but he is also so in touch with the reality of what it is he's writing about. No less than Faulkner writing about the South in the 1930s and 40s, or Hemingway writing about World War I. And you really get a sense of history in these great works. And Tolstoy in the period of Napoleon's invasion in the early 1800s of Russia. This is great stuff.